Hello and welcome to this live Q&A session for Innovative Educators. I am your host, Tony Duty, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. This interview is part of the 5 Habits of Innovative Educators e-course, and as part of the interview today, we invite you to be part of our broadcast by sharing your insights and questions using the hashtag InnovateED, one E only, on Twitter. And I'm also pleased to have join me one of my all-time favorite authors, Liz Wiseman, author of Multipliers, The Multiplier Effect, and the soon-to-be-released book, Rookie Smarts, Why Learning Beats Knowing, The New Game of Work, due to be released this October, I believe. Right, Liz?
Yeah, that's correct.
Excellent. So, Liz, full disclosure, I have to confess, I'm a little nervous and I'm a little starstruck right now because you are without a doubt one of my, if not the favorite leadership author. And folks who know me know that I've read probably 200 books on leadership over the last few years. So I admit it, I'm probably your #1 fan of the Liz Wiseman fan club. I'm sure you didn't know you had such a fan club. And not in a celebrity stalker kind of way, in a good, healthy, admirable way. When I heard about this book, I immediately went to the online Amazon book description. I thought, geez, I could be like the poster child for higher education for this book. So I want people to have an understanding of the context in this. So I pulled a short piece from the Amazon description, and I quote, "In a rapidly changing world, experience can be a curse. Being new, naive, and even clueless can be an asset. Rookies are unencumbered with no baggage to weigh them down, no resources to burden them, and no track record to limit their thinking or aspirations. For today's knowledge workers, constant learning is more valuable than mastery." End quote. So for many years, I've been living, professing, and advocating what you so masterfully put into words, and this book really resonated with me, and I hope that viewers today, it'll get them to start to think different about their approach to hiring, training, and leadership. So with that, I want to ask, I know the focus of Rookie Smarts came about from this question that you've been pondering for some time, this notion of when is not knowing more valuable than knowing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what led you to explore the topic in the first place?
You know, I will, but Tony, I have to just say how delighted I am to join you because, you know, when you write a book, you do it in a cave. And yeah, you know, there's people you interview and you talk to, and maybe you have a few reviewers, but by definition, the people who you ask to review the book already know you, and so they're kind of inclined to say they like it. And so it's really fun to come out of that cave and talk to someone who shares my passion for these ideas and find some value. So how fun is this for me? So what drove me to do this? It really started as a very random rant. I was talking to my publisher. I actually went to go, as one of these great lessons that, things in life are often very serendipitous, and sometimes we take these right angles and they lead us to interesting things. And I was going to meet with my publisher, who published Multipliers, to pitch her on an idea that I had for the next book. She's like, "Okay, Liz, where's your next book?" So I went to pitch her on something, and we started off the conversation with me just in this rant about this burning question I've always had, and it really came out of my Oracle experience, like Multipliers. I think it was part of my post-Oracle therapy, where, I left Oracle and started to do something very different. Really went in search of this kind of rookie experience. I had never had a job at Oracle that I was even remotely qualified for, until I was probably 40 years old, and suddenly I wake up realizing I finally at last am qualified for my job. I actually know what I'm doing, and it's horrible. I just hated the feeling. And so, it took me a while to convince my husband that it was a wise thing for me to leave and go off into this unknown. But as I did that and I ventured out, I wondered, how much of what I know and what I've convinced myself of through my years of experience at one organization, how much of that is going to get in my way? And I was ranting about this to my publisher, Hollis Heimbach, and she said, "Well, Liz, that's your next book, stupid." Of course she didn't say the stupid part, that was implied. And it was actually not too far off of what I wanted to work on, and I realized that it was actually something that wasn't just my own personal experience, that experience can become a tremendous burden. When we start to see patterns, our mind fills in what is not there. And as the world of work is changing very, very fast, you know, and I've come to see this through my experience, you know, when does our experience, I've come to see it through my research, I should say, is, you know, when does our experience become a liability where we miss things and we become off? Meanwhile, people who are rookies doing something for the very first time can leapfrog, you know, those of us who have built mastery and experience. So I set out to research it. I spent a lot of time looking at how inexperienced people versus experienced people approached a work task, whether that's give a lecture, prepare a lesson plan, write a blog, host a Google Hangout show. You and I are both rookies at this, which is fun. And I looked at how they approached them very differently, and what I found was that rookies are actually surprisingly strong performers, and in a number of situations, more and more of which we see today in the way that we work, they outperform veterans. And that really is what the book is about, why we are so often at our best when we don't know what we're doing, and why, you know, this desperate, hungry mode that rookies operate in is actually the mode of work for the future. You know, this scrappy, desperate, hungry way of learning.
I like it. You are such a great educator. You have such a great way of simplifying concepts for readers, and your ability to find metaphors to help people understand your research is astonishing. And in your upcoming book, Rookie Smarts, you categorize 4 modes of rookie smart behavior as the backpacker, hunter-gatherer, firewalker, which I love, and the pioneer. Now, I know you've done some backpacking in your time. You write about it in your book. How did you arrive at these terms? Because I think they're brilliant. And can you quickly describe the mindset of each of these modes for us?
Well, again, I really appreciate that you saw those metaphors in there, because that to me is the funnest and the hardest part of writing is trying to come up with a metaphor that captures the essence of the concept and the behavior and simplifies but doesn't oversimplify. You know, how did I do it? It's really pretty. I wish I was one of these, you know, like inspired creative people who just sat around and, like, I don't know, received these through some sort of divine manifestation. I'm not. I'm a grinded out kind of gal, and I just poured through the data. You know, when I really looked at how the top performing rookies operate, you know, compared to how veterans operate and compared to how bottom performing rookies and veteran staff operate, I just looked at what did they do similar, looking for those patterns of behavior, trying to distill it down to its essence, and then what is the metaphor that captures that, which actually is the easy part, but finding a set of metaphors that all work together was a bit of a tricky bit, but you might find that what emerged from that is a bit of an overarching metaphor around exploration, because that's what I think learning is. You know, learning is this epic, never-ending adventure and exploration. It's lifelong, and so I picked metaphors that came from this world of exploring our world. You know, one being the backpacker, that when we operate in a realm that we don't yet have mastery of, or even a realm in which we're clueless, we're intellectually unencumbered. You know, we don't have a reputation, a track record, you know, preconceived notions, assumptions that weigh us down. And much like a wilderness backpacker, it allows us to explore new terrain. It allows us to move fast. And you probably remember that story from the book about my husband and I out backpacking, and the flash flood comes through. And it was the fact that we just didn't have a lot of junk with us that allowed us to move quickly. You know, contrast to how we tend to work when we're in this veteran mode, where we're settled in. You know, we're in contrast to a backpacker, maybe, you know, we're car camping, where we have so much stuff, resources, staff, programs, processes. We're so encumbered intellectually and organizationally that we just can't move. We can't let go, but we become kind of caretakers to the status quo. So that's one of the 4. You know, the second is that we operate in what I call hunter-gatherer mode. Because we lack knowledge, it forces us out of our own heads and out of our own chairs, and we're forced to go out, beyond our own camp and gather, gathering nuts and berries, hunting. We're in an outward mode, but it's not just that we're constantly moving outward, we're bringing that back, almost like we're bringing that knowledge back to the tribe, back to the problem at bear, as opposed to, sort of the local guide that sits around kind of doling out advice. The third, also my favorite, see, Tony, you and I are kind of kinfolk on this, is this idea that when we're rookies, we operate like coal walkers, fire walkers. I found this interesting contradiction in the data that I puzzled over for a long time. That when we don't know what we're doing, we tend to be very cautious, very risk averse. But yet we operate very fast. And I thought, how could that be? We think of caution as slow, unwilling to venture out. But when you add these two things together, it's like the way we operate when we're walking hot coals. Now, I have never done this, I have to confess. And I do have a big birthday coming up, but I'm thinking that the birthday party might just be a coal walking ceremony, because the way these coal walkers do this, it's not this sort of paranormal kind of feat, it's just simple physics, is they move so fast over the hot coals that they're never burnt. And when we don't know what we're doing, we're very cautious. We make sure the environment is safe, but we scoot through it fast. And why do we move so fast? Because we have to prove ourselves. Essentially, there's no points on our board. And so we're so desperate to prove that we can do something that we move really quick. It was amazing to find that rookies deliver faster than people with experience. Sometimes it's the wrong product faster, which is why they need clear direction. And then the last is we tend to operate like frontiersmen, like pioneers. We operate in this kind of scrappy, relentless, forging ahead, because we're sort of out on a frontier. We have nothing. And so we're trying to build something to kind of get some basic necessities. And so they simplify, they focus on the very basics.
Cool. I love them, and I love the contrasting metaphors as well. I actually was doing some research on firewalking for a workshop I was doing, and I thought that would be a great, cool workshop for our student leaders here at Rutgers. I'm not quite sure I'll be able to pass up our risk management folks, but I wanted to give it a shot. So you write about when you ask a child what they want to be when they grow up, and I've got 3 little boys, so they say this all the time: I want to be an astronaut, I want to be a doctor, a teacher, I want to be an athlete. And you say when you ask college students, they're likely to give you a fake answer, and when you ask working professionals, many will admit that they don't have a clue. But perpetual rookies, you say, regardless of their age, have a totally different mindset. What's that mindset?
Well, the first is this idea of a perpetual rookie, and this was one of the fun findings in my research as I studied how rookies operate and why they are often at their very best. I noticed this breed of rookie that I came to call the perpetual rookie. This is the experienced person. This is someone who has a lot of knowledge, a lot of mastery, but despite years of experience, they maintain their rookie smarts, their ability to think and operate as if they were doing something for the very first time. And it's not, it's not that they stay in this perpetual rookie state. It's not that they remain kind of naive, clueless forever. I mean, that actually probably wouldn't be that endearing. But it's they have the ability to conjure up this state. It's almost as if they can toggle between this state of expertise and mastery, this kind of veteran, savvy, kind of the hard-won wisdom that comes from experience, but they know when it's time, I guess almost like a superhero. And, kind of walking the streets as, is it Clark Kent? Yeah, Superman.
Yeah, Superman,
walking the streets as sort of your ordinary Clark Kent, but knowing when a situation warrants some superpowers, and then able to kind of don the cloak of Superman. They know when it's time to toggle in and find this rookie state, which, when you really look at this rookie state, it's very similar to how we think and operate when we're children. When we're unencumbered by knowledge, when we're unashamed by our lack of knowing, when we're just delighted every day with what we're learning. They have this ability to find their childlike wonder. And, one of my favorite perpetual rookies that I studied, there were so many interesting ones, but one was Bob Hurley. This is Bob Hurley, who started Hurley Sports. And, he was a surfboard shaper, and, he started shaping boards, a surf shop. It was back in the late 70s. A shop owner gave him a chance to make boards branded with the Hurley name. And slowly he decided he wanted to sell some board shorts with that, and he kind of started to build this surf apparel empire. I heard Bob tell his story, and at every juncture in building this business, he said, I had no clue how to do it. I wanted to represent Billabong shorts. They were kind of the hot punk shorts at the time. He had no clue, so he called up the guy who ran Billabong. Hey, dude, I want to be your distributor, What's it going to take? And every juncture, the fact that he didn't know what he was doing opened up these incredible opportunities. And as I was talking to Bob about his journey, Bob now is a very successful company. It's a division of Nike. I said, how do you maintain this kind of rookie mindset? And he said, well, I have days where it's tough, where I really am stuck in a rut. And he said, I remember something I learned from, this was a surfer back in the 70s. This is, they called him Rabbit Bartholomew. He was the Australian champion, world champion surfer. Now, Bob was part of this surf clique that hung out on Huntington Beach. And, Huntington Beach, I got this sense that it was a lot like a high school, a lot of cliques. And there were the prime waves, and that's where, like, the cool kids surfed. And that's where the professional surfers surfed. And Bob was just kind of on the outer ring of this group of surfers. And he's out there surfing on the prime waves, and he loses his board. Board kind of slips under the pier. He goes swimming after it, and he sees Rabbit surfing over in the lesser waves on the other side of the pier. And he's like, dude, you're a legend. Like, come on, come over here and surf. The waves are killer. Or, however the surf lingo goes. I've only had one attempt at surfing, and it wasn't really pretty. And Rabbit said, like, thanks, mate, but I want to surf with the kids. This is where I get my energy and my inspiration. And it really, really impacted Bob. And he said, when I have these days when I'm stuck, I get my board and I go down to the beach and I surf. But I don't surf with the professional surfers. Bob knows them all. He sponsors many of these surfers. He says, I go into the lesser waves and I surf with the amateurs, the kids, the young at heart. He says, there I find my inspiration. But it doesn't always require him to grab a board and go surf. He says, sometimes I just go talk to the most junior person in my team or the person in that rookie assignment. He says, that's how I rekindle my rookie smarts. And Bob is just one example, but as I looked at each one of these perpetual rookies, I found they all had some sort of ritual, some sort of way that they maintain this fresh, youthful, open way of seeing their work.
So you were able to bring in a Superman metaphor during that story, which I love. You brought up this. I think lots of educators get into the field because, particularly in higher education, because they feel re-energized by connecting with a younger generation and sharing their knowledge, just like you described. As you were talking about this switching into the cape of Superman, it made me think. As I was reading the book, I felt myself, depending on my role, toggling and catching myself saying, I've got a veteran mindset on this particular initiative and a total rookie mindset on this other one. So I felt myself toggling back and forth between the two concepts. So I don't know what the solution is there, but it was something in the back of my head as I read through the book.
Well, I think that is, and Tony, I think that is the goal. One of my worries with this book is that people are going to either do a cursory read or just kind of get the gist of it, and they're going, advocating rookies good, veterans bad. Or even worse, young professionals good, older experienced professionals bad. That's not the case at all. I think the message of the book is that you can be a perpetual rookie, and it's not about forsaking your experience. You get to take your experience with you. It's knowing when it's time to play the role of the rookie and when it's time to conjure up your veteran savvy, and being able to do that in different parts of your career at different times, and maybe, even within the same meeting, and to be able to have that full repertoire. The trick is a lot of us lose that rookie mindset really fast.
Absolutely.
And it's work to regain it.
I'm glad you said that, because I'm getting up there in my years, and I often feel like I'm that kid in the candy store. And I do some presentations with higher education folks all the time, and I ask them 3 questions. How many people consider themselves to be educators? And almost all their hands go up, thank God. And then I ask how many people consider themselves to be lifelong learners, and not so many hands go up. And then I ask them how many people consider themselves to be leaders, and even fewer hands go up. And I really think, and you totally point this out through your books, that those 3 concepts are really intertwined: education, leadership, and lifelong learning. And it happens, it's along a continuum, right? It doesn't stop when you leave college. Learning shouldn't stop when you leave college.
Right. And I think, my experience doesn't come from higher ed. My experience comes from the corporate world. And, if I had a wish for leaders in the corporate world, it's, and clearly my book Multipliers screams this message, is that the best leaders create an environment of learning. That's really what the role is. They're educators, and you look at the skill set between the best educators and the best leaders out in the workplace, and I would say it's not even overlap. I would say it's really the same core skill sets. We want leadership and learnership to be coexisting, both in our educators and in our business managers.
Nice. And we should be teaching our students that too, of course. So there was some statistics that blew me away from your book. You share that in the 70s, it was estimated that the annual rate of knowledge relevance decay, it's a long-term, knowledge relevance decay, was over 10% across all industries. And then you cite a more recent study from 2005 that estimated that knowledge becomes obsolete at a rate of 15% each year. And then a more recent study showed that the decay in high tech is 30%. Now, this has been a challenge for me in particular because I work so closely with technology in my role. And you can imagine people get conflicted as to whether they should become an expert with deep knowledge in an area versus a generalist with very broad knowledge. So what are your thoughts? What's the solution? Where should we be focusing our learning?
Yeah. Well, yeah, actually, when I looked at all this data, I looked at the rates at which information is becoming increasingly available. And I think when we look at the work environment we're in, we're getting more and more information. This is not a surprise to anyone. It's doubling every 18 months. In certain fields, it's doubling every 9 months. We all feel this, bombarded by information. We feel cycles spinning a lot faster. Cycles right now are spinning so fast because of technology, and it's really the world I come from. I sort of live in the heart of Silicon Valley here, and grew up in the software industry. Is these technology tools, what they're really allowing is for cycles to spin really fast because we can get our work done faster. That alone is a challenge, but then this knowledge that we're acquiring is decaying so fast. And when you add this up, I was startled when I did some basic calculations. I had to kind of pause in my chair because, if you work in STEM, in science and technology, at the rate that knowledge is increasing and decaying, about 15% of what you know today will be relevant in 5 years. Wow. I think that's stunning. I think it's stunning. Now, you mentioned you have 3 boys. My guess is they're probably 3 young boys.
Yes, twins that are 4 years old and a 6-year-old boy. Okay,
beautiful, beautiful. Like, don't tell my kids this, but I so want to trade because I have teenagers. I have 4 children, and my youngest is 11, so he's still like tons of fun. But I have these teenagers, and living with 3 teenagers, I have 1 in college, 2 in high school. It's so apparent to me how fast the world is changing. and how hard it is for me to keep pace with the learning tools, how fast they can learn. If I want to know something, I go ask my teenagers. But you know, when you look at this rate of decay, you know, I think someone could say, well, wait a minute, is it worth it to build expertise? Or should I be this kind of generalist? And maybe you might even substitute, should I be like a multiplier? You know, like, should I be the one that just facilitates the learning? I think this is a really dangerous false dichotomy, because I think the real answer is none of the above. Because if you go down the path of expertise, you know, you run the risk of being kind of yesterday's know-it-all. And we all know sort of that has-been know-it-all. Where you're like, you know, have you been sleeping for the last year? The world has changed. You know, it reminds me of the time it took me years trying to convince my father that the Cadillac wasn't the hottest car out there on the market. You know, but maybe it now is. But you know, that's the path of antiquated expertise, and it's very dangerous. I think it was Stephen Hawking who said, you know, the real enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, but the illusion of knowledge. But if you go down the other path, the generalist path, you know, I think you run the risk of being an empty suit. You know, and this is like the concept of multipliers gone wrong. You know, some people think multipliers is about just being the one to ask the question, sort of being a know-nothing. And it really isn't the case. It's about using your knowledge to spark learning and to access knowledge in other people. I think the path that we need to go down is this kind of rapid, half-expert path. And, you know, we're working in an environment where learning is more important than knowing. So it's not this kind of empty suit generalist of, oh, I don't really know anything, I'll just go knock on somebody else's door. No, it's incumbent on us to learn fast. And one of the book is full of little experiments, little tiny learning experiments you could try. One of them is become a half expert. And I think it models the way that we need to be learning. How fast can you climb halfway up a learning path? You know, it's not worth it to build deep expertise in a lot of areas, but we have to be able to take an area, kind of wrestle it down, you know, learn as much as we can in a short period of time, and then be willing to move on. You know, knowing enough not to be dangerous, but knowing enough about something to know who are the experts I need to access, what are the questions, what are the dilemmas. And I think we can climb halfway up a learning curve really, really fast. You know, it's that last bit that takes years of mastery and deliberate practice. And that's probably the part that most of us don't have the luxury of developing. But I think the new model of working is rapid cycles of becoming a half expert, which is not unlike the process of higher education.
Yeah, you brought up, I guess it wasn't Malcolm Gladwell, it was someone else's research about the 10,000 rule, rule that most people are familiar with, and then you shared some other research that showed that most skills in the workspace only require about 20 hours of training to master them well enough to use in the workplace.
Well, I think this is one of the dangers of, you know, this 10,000 hour rule. I think it's either Eric Anderson or Anders Ericsson. I think it's Anders Ericsson. And, you know, Gladwell popularized his research, and you know, I deeply believe that research is in question. But what I noticed when I looked at it is that research was done in the realm of physical mastery. Athletes, musicians, surgeons. But and you know, I don't know about you, but I don't want a rookie surgeon. You know, I don't want a rookie dentist. You know, if I'm going to jump out of an airplane, I don't really want to be strapped to the guy who's like, dude, this is my first one too. You know, in the realm where it requires deep physical capability, that takes years of experience. But most of us don't work in that realm. We work in the knowledge realm, where that knowledge is fleeting. And that's where I think, you know, it takes a much, much shorter period of time, and we have to be able to cycle through that much faster. Who can afford 10,000 hours at the rate change is coming at us?
So you make a distinction between knowledge acquisition and knowledge retention, right? So you make a case for knowledge acquisition. Doesn't that kind of flies in the face of traditional education? And so what do we need to change in our mindset about gaining knowledge as opposed to just holding on to it?
Yeah. Well, it is true. I imagine you're a father of 3 young children. Imagine this cognitive dissonance that I've been operating in, writing this book about claiming, the ability to acquire knowledge is more important than the ability to retain knowledge. We now have devices, and I think our memories are starting to change. Like, how many phone numbers do you know? I don't know many because my iPhone
I remember
knows.
the one from growing up, my grandma's phone number.
Exactly. But what we need rapid access to information that's stored on servers and in the cloud. But here's where the cognitive dissonance for me comes in. I'm the mother of 4 school-aged children. And, I've got a few here in high school, and I watch them laboring to stuff their brains full of this knowledge and regurgitate it back. And how many times have I had to bite my tongue? Because what I really want to say is, you're never going to be asked that again. Like, you will never need to know that. But I actually take heart in this because although, we look at the process of education, K through 12 and higher education, we could say, it's kind of a farce because, so much of what we've learned in that process we don't use. I use very little of what I learned in college. But that's not where I think I don't think the value of education is content. I think the value of education is the process of climbing up that learning curve, of getting halfway up, not to the level of a PhD and not to the level of knowledge your professor has, but how do you get enough of this that you know the questions to ask, that you can recognize this concept when it presents itself, and know the right person to ask. And it's that process of learning fast, stuffing in your brain, the ability, to regurgitate it, that's valuable.
So
proving to yourself you can do hard things.
Right. So if learning fast is important, it makes me think, when you're interviewing someone for a position, how can you determine someone's ability to learn fast through an interview or through questions?
This is one I don't have a great answer to because I'm not very good at this. I know there are people who are really good at it, and I did study it, and actually in the book I spent some time trying to put together some websites and some tools and how to identify some of this, and somewhere in the editorial process that got taken out. I'll probably put it in the website. I think the company to look to at this is Google. I think Google does this better than anyone else that I know. Google hires people not for their content knowledge. They say their experience is the least important of the critical skills that they look for, and they look for people who have this ability to learn really, really fast. And if you talk to people who've interviewed there, you're going to get a problem dumped in your lap. How do you figure out how many phone books are needed in New York City? I mean, I'm terrified that I would ever have to go and interview at Google. But they do these kind of performance tests. How quickly can you think? How quickly can you think on your feet? Also assessing for levels of humility. There's an interesting book coming out. It's called Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, who is the head of people operations, the head of HR for Google, and he's written a book. And I'm assuming in that book is going to be some of the guidance of how Google looks for these kind of ferocious learners that they're known for hiring.
Gotcha. So related to that, you refer to a term borrowed from the military called VUCA. It's an acronym, right? Commonly used to describe an environment of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And you describe it, it's often where you don't face the same problem twice. So how has the workscape changed over the last few decades, and how should we change our approach to not just education, but also career training to adapt to that volatility?
Well, I think I'm going to remind myself of a conversation I had when I was at Oracle. So I ran the university at Oracle. So I don't have a lot of experience in higher ed other than this little pretend higher ed inside the corporate world. But in my role as head of the university for Oracle, I often got asked to sit on local university committees, helping them kind of reshape education. And one of them was Stanford, kind of our neighboring university. We hired a lot of people from Stanford. And I remember being asked, gee, Liz, given, Oracle's perspective as a large employer in the area, how should we be refocusing education, and what skills should we be teaching inside the university? And I was really taken back by this question. And my answer then might have been a little bit naive, but I don't think my answer has changed, because I said, I don't think higher ed should change. I don't think higher ed should become a job skill factory. I don't think we should be teaching trade skills. My response then was, just teach people to think. I mean, teach people to ask good questions, to pursue something deeply, to know the difference between good information and bad information. Like, we want to hire them smart. And in our corporate universities, we'll give them the latest, whether, it's XML training or Java training, or at the time I think it was C++, that, I would think, and this is sort of my personal view of higher education, I would think it would be a shame for our universities to turn into job skill factories. I think we need people who can think deeply, ask questions, debate, know how to argue things from multiple sides, know how to expose, not just find the right answer, but expose risk.
You're going to make a lot of people that are watching this happy with that answer.
Well, it may not be popular in the workplace, but I really think it's the role of our universities, and I can't imagine what would happen if our universities lost that.
Right. So something else that you wrote that I think our viewers will find interesting, you cite another study from Kristen Crandall from University of Kansas that sought out to identify how people choose friends and the people who they surround themselves with. And he found that given a larger student body, students are more likely to become friends with people who are similar, and the larger the student body, the easier it is for students to surround themselves with like-minded people. So what's wrong with surrounding yourself with like-minded people? It feels good, right? And if we shouldn't, how do we counter that tendency?
Yeah, it's sort of a disturbing statistic, isn't it, that we seek out like-minded people, that actually the parts of our brain, like the happy parts of our brain, light up when we meet someone like-minded, and that we get this sort of stranger danger alert when we encounter people who think differently, who look differently than us. That we're actually, in some ways, physiologically, we're not built for diversity. It's scary, and it actually made me think. My oldest child is off at a large university, and I thought, you almost want to say, no, you need to be forced into a small environment where you are encountering friction and conflict, where you can't retreat to your comfortable space. And it reminded me of something else I know that you had asked about in the book, this idea of an echo chamber. And I think the echo chamber is one of the sort of most subtle but dangerous phenomenons of our time. And I think it's one that I think it's one of the dark sides of technology, as if we needed another dark side of technology. But, we have now, through our technical tools, the ability to customize our worlds. Not only to make our desktops look the way we want, but to make our news feeds feed us the information that we want. And like the fact that we tend to want to surround ourselves with like-minded people, most people feed themselves news from sources that they agree with. Maybe it's a conservative view versus a liberal view, or maybe a domestic view versus a world view. I remember the time it was during the Olympics, and I was traveling on business in the Netherlands, and I'm in the hotel gym, and I'm on the track, and I'm watching the Olympics, and I'm like, wow, doesn't look like the Americans are winning anything in this Olympics. That was kind of my first reaction, and then I realized how idiotic my thought was, because what were they showing on Dutch TV? They weren't showing the Americans winning the Olympics. They were showing the Dutch athletes. A totally different perspective. You know, when we read news from different countries, we get entirely different perspectives on issues. And the echo chamber allows us to kind of wallow in likeness, and to customize our news feeds to what we like, and then to sit back and kind of like it all, so to speak, which allows us to further entrench in our own thinking. It confirms our very assumptions. And one of the very practical things one might do to rekindle a rookie mindset is to break out of this echo chamber. To, if you read the New York Times, you might switch to the Wall Street Journal. If you watch Fox News, maybe you watch MSNBC. A horrifying thought that might be for some people, and maybe you actually open yourself up to feeds and views that you really, really disagree with, or you invite a lot of diversity into that. And I think the same is true with the people that we associate with. I have to tell you, I have to admit, I'm going to be the first to admit it, I like working with like-minded people. If you gave me the choice, Liz, would you like a really diverse team of people who really argue with you and tell you you're wrong and have a very different point of view, or would you like to work with a team of people who all kind of share your same values and way of thinking? I'm not heroic. I'm going to choose the like-minded team because it's easier. So I think we have to force ourselves outside of the comfort zone. Maybe our core team might be people who really share our views and values, but we have ways to open the valves to get contrary points of view, to mess with our minds and our worlds a little bit.
So it sounds like you've evolved a little bit in your writing. I think I read that you, in your first book, Multipliers, you really didn't want that feedback. You were afraid to get that feedback, but for Rookie Smarts, you intentionally sought out the dissonance. You sought out people that had an opposing opinion to what you were putting out there.
Wow, Tony, you read the whole book through to the appendix. Through to the appendix, because I think that's an idea that came out in the appendix, is when we are new to something, when people are doing something for time, they need a different kind of leadership, and they need a different kind of feedback. The kind of feedback that is most validating when someone is brand new is affirmation. Hey, you're on the right track. You're doing it right. Liz, I love your book. Keep going, keep going. They need that encouragement because they're wandering in the dark, and they need to be able to bump up and feel like, okay, I'm on the right path. So as a leader, if you've got someone in a rookie mode, positive validation is the most important kind of feedback you can give. However, when you're experienced at something, you don't need positive validation, because if the world's not already giving it to you, you're giving it to yourself. You're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. And the most valuable kind of feedback you can get is contrary feedback. And, I mentioned the cognitive dissonance of sort of like having teenagers in school versus, writing a book about how that's, knowledge retention is not important. Imagine sort of the inner struggle that comes from writing a book about how we think and act when we're doing something the first time, when I now have experience as a writer and an author. Like, that messed with my mind. Like, have I become comfortable as a researcher and a writer, and is that getting in my way? And one of the things I did to counter that was just seek out a lot more criticism than I would normally have done. And I had to work to get it.
It reminds me of a great quote from the CEO of IBM, Gina Rometty, said, "Growth and comfort don't coexist." And
it's beautiful. It's beautiful, and I think it's one of the things. One of my things I love to look at is how people sort of criticize leaders in organizations, and we look at our senior leaders and we go, "Gee, they don't really know what they're doing." And one of the things that we don't often appreciate is how hard it is when you're at the top of an organization to see things clearly. We think, oh, these guys are at the top. They're like standing at the peak. They have this kind of eminent view of what's going on. It's actually not the case at all. These people are lonely. It's very, very difficult to get contrary views when you're at the top of an organization, and leaders have to go out of their way to get it. It's like they have to work 4 or 5 times as hard as other people.
You bring up this concept of seeking out the feedback requires a little bit of self-confidence, right? And you talk about self-confidence only being helpful when it's low, and it seems counter to this traditional image that many people hold of what a leader should be, right? Someone who should be powerful and strong, and can speak with incredible charisma and conviction. So this self-confidence, what do you mean by it's only helpful when it should be low?
Yeah, interesting. Oh God, there's so many fun ways that we can go with that idea and that question. In the book, I cite research, and it's research that comes out of the University College of London. And boy, I have to make sure I get his name right. It's a little bit of a tricky name. Thomas Camaro Premusic is his name, and he's done this research, and he comes to this conclusion that he studied confidence upways and sideways, and he said he's found that it's only valuable when confidence is low, that it drives this kind of performance cycle. And building on that, I don't know that I would go so far as to claim that low self-confidence is valuable. I think when we look at the workplace, whether it be in higher ed, whether it be in our corporations, we see the power of low self-confidence. You see that kind of hyper overachiever senior leader who's driven to prove themselves, and we can see that underneath that hood that there's maybe something broken, that there's an inadequacy that's propelling this kind of paranoid productivity. And in some cases, it's valuable to organizations. I wouldn't want to be one of those folks, and I'm not sure I would want to work too closely with one. However, what I think is extraordinarily valuable is low situational confidence. And that's where I make a little bit of a distinction based, that maybe a different nuance to this study, is that when our confidence is low in a certain situation, it drives incredibly good behavior. Meaning, I don't know what I'm doing. We seek out expertise. We ask questions. We move cautiously. We move quickly. We improvise. We listen. I think if I had to put together my sort of ideal warrior for the new world of work, it would be someone with really high self-confidence, someone willing to step out into a discomfort zone, someone willing to take on a rookie assignment, because they have the fundamental self-confidence to go, oh, God, I can walk through this valley of death and get myself out of it. I can climb up a really steep learning curve without falling, but putting them in a situation where they have very low situational confidence, clueless, not knowing what they're doing, and very aware of it. I think that's the power combination.
So you say traits are much harder to inculcate than behaviors, and that you're looking for people who are curious, humble, playful, and deliberate, and you actually get a higher return on coaching investment than you do if you simply hire folks who just have rookie smart behaviors. The behavior versus traits, can you talk about the difference?
Yeah, I think, and some of this comes from my experience in education, in corporate education. It's relatively easy to teach people skills, technical skills and behavioral skills. And I've seen so many people try to behave their way into certain kinds of leadership, but not make it. Because what they're lacking is the fundamental mindset. And what they're lacking is perhaps a fundamental humility. And I think that's where you can hire people who have these core attributes of perpetual rookies, people who are curious, intellectually curious, people who operate with a hunger to know what other people know. You can save a lot of time on training and coaching if you hire people who already are that way, but you can waste a lot of time in coaching trying to teach people how to ask insightful questions when they fundamentally think they should be talking and teaching that person. And again, I think Google is one of the organizations that I think has done a good job hiring for for intellectual openness. I can't wait for Laszlo's book. I'm going to have to send him this and put pressure on it.
I can't wait for your book to go live so I can buy it for all my friends and colleagues. One of the pieces of the book that a colleague, Courtney O'Connell, who connected me to you, talked about, we both found interesting, was you have such a great balance in the book of stories about women leaders, and then you did some, in your research, you found that women were 12% less likely than men to take a job, and that a job that was 2 sizes too big. Do you foresee the tide shifting in the near future, and do you have any specific recommendations for viewers to help us bridge that gap?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think it's a big surprise what we found. I think what I found in this research, and we looked at this over a relatively large body of data, it's like over 1,000 people, and we did find that women are less likely than men to want to take on a big stretch. And there's been a lot written about this, the confidence code, Cheryl's book, Lean In, that women tend to be reluctant in this space. Is that changing? I think one of the, I certainly didn't approach this book with any gender agenda, but I think one of the outcomes that I hope for this book is that we'll see that women do tend to be more cautious, more reluctant about going outside of their comfort zone. Add to that something that I think is probably well documented. I know it, sort of intuitively and anecdotally through looking at a lot of women leaders, is that women tend to be prone to perfectionism. We're these incredible multitaskers taking a lot of things on. And what I hope that will come from this book is that women who are often reluctant to be out in this scrappy place because they might not do it right, that they'll realize that reluctance and size that challenge right, and that their leaders, both men and women who lead our female professionals, will master the art of sizing that gap right, giving someone a stretch that's, supersizing their job, so to speak, giving them a stretch that is a size too big, but not something that's either going to cause them to fail, or to hold back and never really take it. And I've spent a lot of years leading. My whole career I've been managing. I studied leadership, and I think one of the things that I personally get wrong all the time is sizing that gap. And I think I've now learned it in this second half of my career, is that's the true mastery of leadership, is knowing when someone's ready for a new stretch, being able to see it, being able to kind of give them a pat on the back and then a push out of their comfort zone, and knowing how far to push, because with some people you can give them a job that's 2 or 3 sizes too big and they take it willingly, they grow into it fast. Other people, it's a half size.
You talk about, so that's a good leader will be able to identify that, but you also say that as an employee, as a rookie, you need to step up and let your supervisor, manager, leader know when you're ready to take on that stretch challenge, right?
Right. And I think, kind of going back to this issue of gender, I think that's one of the things that I would like women to see in this is, yes, maybe there's a lot of women who tend to have a reluctance to do this. But here's, I think, the big news for women is, once women are out into this discomfort zone, they're natural rookies. When you look at a lot of the behavioral elements of this rookie mindset, women are naturals at this, and in some ways better than men. And some of the data that showed that they actually have higher levels of some of these rookie smarts. So it's like, once you get yourself in this space, it's actually your comfort zone. It's what you're good at, and it's our happiest place to be. And I think there's something on the employee to say, you know what, I'm ready to take on a challenge. I think Tony, here's like an ideal scenario that I hope this simple conversation is replicated throughout workplaces around the world, is that managers learn to ask a very simple question of their staff, and that is, hey Liz, what's the challenge that I should be asking you to take on? What's the next hard thing we should be asking you to do? Because see, we all know what it is. We all know what we want to sink our teeth into, but we don't generally come in and announce that. And managers think they have to have some like magic 8-ball voodoo magic, to be able to sense what's the exact right thing that Tony needs. And I go with a simple approach. Tony, hey, are you ready for the next big challenge? Okay, what is that challenge? And size that stretch for me. I think it's like the lazy man's guide to leadership. Is if you can't divine it, just ask it, for heaven's sakes. We found in this research that people are ready. It takes about 3 months for someone, once they've been given a hard challenge, to kind of figure out which way's up, and do something about it. And then when we ask them, how soon after are you ready for the next stretch? Immediately. And I also hope that not only do managers have that simple conversation, I hope more employees go into their boss's office and say, you know what, here's the hard thing I'd like to take on. And instead of asking for promotions, because no manager really wants to be on the other side of the desk when someone comes in and says, hey, I think I'm due for a promotion. We'd like to be the one to surprise someone with that. But who doesn't love to have someone march in their office and say, you know what, I'm ready for the next big challenge. Give it to me. And actually, here's the thing I'd like to take on.
I love it.
I hope we have more of those conversations.
Love it. So I want to be respectful of your time, and I want to finish with one last question. And you've kind of answered this a little bit. I want you to think back on your own college experience and think about what would you have liked to see different about that experience. And the kind of follow-up to that question is, if you could re-envision higher ed learning, the whole learning experience from the ground up, how might that experience be different than what we see here today?
Oh, it's a tough last question for me, because I don't really, I thought my college education was great. I think my undergraduate education was standard. It was terrific. I went to Brigham Young University. I also went there for graduate school, and I had this amazing graduate program. Jay Bonner Ritchie, actually the educator I dedicate the multiplier effect to. He set this tone for the department, and he was so clear that we were there to learn to think, and to learn to think deeply and hard, and we were there to debate issues, and that what we were learning, I just got the sense that what we were learning wasn't important, that I could kind of burn the book, so to speak. After I graduated, it was the process of thinking deeply. And if there was something he drilled into my head, it was, learn to master ambiguity. Learn to sit comfortably in the space of ambiguity and not wallow in it, but learn to process it and to get yourself out of it. This was an incredible educator. He actually was someone who was instrumental in the mid-90s peace talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians, was kind of a key broker to that, and it was because he learned to see, he was open. And it's a story we don't have time for, but it deeply affected me. And, I often think back on how grateful I was for faculty who understood that it was the process of thinking and having hard dialogues that was the true value of education. And it really has shaped the way that I think about work. And, I guess my hope is that more and more people would have that experience, that elite universities wouldn't just be incredible research institutions. They would see that there is no higher calling than being a brilliant educator, that it's the highest contribution that we could make.
Wow, can't think of a better way to close than that final thought. Liz, thank you so much for your time today. I want to urge everyone, please go out, pre-order Liz's book, Rookie Smarts, Why Learning Beats Knowing in the New Game of Work, which will be released in October. I know I'll be buying several copies for my friends, coworkers, and even our student leaders here at Rutgers. And of course, if you have not read her first book, Multipliers, I can't recommend it enough that you go buy it, read it, share it with your friends. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. And to thank Courtney O'Connell for helping set this interview up. If you're interested in signing up for the Innovation in EDU e-course, you have one more day to save 50% off enrollment. Look for the link to enroll from @CourtO'Connell. That's her Twitter address. And I'll be returning in the fall for some more live webcasts. Please find me on Twitter for more information and details of upcoming guests. Until then, my name is Tony Duty. Make it a great week, and thanks again for watching. Thanks, Liz.
Tony, thank you so much. Well done with the rookie move on the Google Hangouts. Did we rock the Hangouts? Someone will tell
I don't
us.
know. We're gonna have to check the Twitter feed and see what people thought.
Hangout technology work. But it was an absolute delight talking with you.
You too. Thanks, Liz. All right, we're still on.